Thank you, Kenny. Always good to work with my favorite septuagenarian on Friday nights, JT Curtis. No, that's not you yet, but it's coming. And we certainly have a great time. It's another great high school football season. I just wish we had a unified playoff system, and we're not going to have that again this year. Maybe there'll be some changes for next year. We can only hope. Let's talk about the Saints. I think they're in a pretty great position here. There's no one, I don't think anyone in this room thought the Saints would be 7-1 at this point after Drew Brees went out in the second series against the Rams. Pretty amazing deal there. And the one thing I will say about the Saints, there's been a tremendous amount of talk this year about Sean Payton being the coach of the year in the NFL. And I understand those sentiments. But in my opinion, I don't think he's that much different a coach than he was 5 years ago. I think what he's got now is great players. And he's been responsible for a lot of that. Frankly, their approach changed. They got burned on the Jarvis Bird deal. They got burned on the C.J. Spiller deal. And what they've done is they've gone back to what I think is their tried and true formula. And that is building through the draft and filling their team in with some really good free agents that they think are going to be able to come to New Orleans and be better players. Demario Davis was a very good player for the Jets. He's been even better for the Saints. A.J. Klein was a part-time player for Carolina. He stepped in, and he's been a great player for the Saints, outstanding. So he and Demario Davis are not only really good players, but they're very smart veteran players, and they're great presence in the locker room. And those are the kind of free agents that don't break the bank and allow you to move on and do some of the things you need to do to re-sign your own players. And look at what they've done to upgrade their roster. No knock on Luke McCown. Luke McCown was a solid backup in the NFL. But they went out and they got Teddy Bridgewater. And Teddy Bridgewater is a guy who started a lot of games for Minnesota. He started 29 games in 2 years. So here's a guy who really understands what it takes to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. So he was thrust into that role, and he was certainly ready for it and improved. So the Saints spent their third-round pick on Teddy Bridgewater. Automatically, there was an upgrade at the backup quarterback spot. Look what they've done on defense. Name all the guys that they've drafted. Lattimore, Marcus Williams, Davenport, Rankins, Onyemata. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's been terrific. He's been unbelievable as the nickelback. So all of these guys, and they got Eli Apple in a trade, but all of these guys have been selected. All the guys that I mentioned before are here from 2016 on. So if you look at their roster, to me, they have the best roster in the National Football League right now. Because the one thing they have is they have a very talented roster and they have a very young roster. Look at all the guys, and look, Michael Thomas was the first guy of many that they're going to have to re-sign and pay big money to. That's why having a guy like Teddy Bridgewater, if you can convince him to stay, he could be your quarterback at an affordable price, and that would allow you to keep Alvin Kamara, to keep Lattimore, to keep all of these guys when they get to that 4th and 5th year in their contract, and you want to keep them here and you want to keep your nucleus together. If not, you're going to have to go into the draft and maybe find a guy. I know there's been a lot of speculation about Joe Burrow, but to me, Joe Burrow's playing himself into a position now where he's going to be a top 10 pick. Top 5, says JJ, and I couldn't disagree with that. So it's going to be hard to find that guy in the draft unless you really want to give up a lot of draft capital to get them. So I think Sean Payton is a very good coach. Obviously, his record speaks for itself. But to me, the one thing that the Saints have done over the last 3 or 4 years is they have done the best job in the NFL in the draft. And if you don't think that's the case, get that little lineup on Sunday and check off all the boxes and all the guys that they drafted. Now, they didn't have a first-round pick this year. What did they do? They went out and got Eric McCoy, who's not only a very good player, but seems like a very sharp guy, and a guy who's going to be the center of your offensive line for 10 years, okay? And he fits perfectly in the Saints locker room. All business, very understated. He kind of reminds me of an offensive lineman's Marcus Colston. Perfect fit for the Saints. Not only that, he's a very good football player. Then you go out and in the 4th round, you got Gardner Johnson, who, you know, when P.J. Williams comes back this week, he's not going to be in the starting lineup, I wouldn't guess, because this guy, at least for the short time, has taken his job. He's a very good player. So again, when you continue to look at what the Saints have done, look at what they've done in the draft. It's been outstanding. One other thing, if you look, and I did some research on it yesterday, talking about, you know, it's a shame that the Saints are not in the AFC, really, because the Patriots are 8-0, and the next best team has 5 wins. So they have a 3-game lead on everybody in their conference, the Patriots do. The Saints are in a conference where there's at least 5 teams who have 6 wins. So the NFC is really stacked this year. It's top heavy. There's a lot of bad teams at the bottom, but it's very top heavy, the NFC, and very good. But if you look at what the Saints have been able to do, it kind of speaks to the strength of their schedule. Their 7 victories have come against teams that have won 27 games. And the only team close to that is the 7-1 Green Bay Packers. Their opponents have won 26 games. And everyone's talking about the 49ers, and I understand that. The 49ers are a good young team. They lost their quarterback last year, and they built wisely through the draft. They have a lot of good young players, but their 7 wins have come against teams that have 16 victories. So there is a huge disparity, and we all knew this. There's a huge disparity what the Saints schedule is and what maybe San Francisco's schedule is. Now, on December 8th, we'll settle that. They'll be here in the Dome, and I think when you look at the playoff picture, it's going to be a very, very pivotal game. Because if the Saints kind of get there and the 49ers get there, then it could be a high-stakes game as far as who does what in the playoffs. I know the coaches will go crazy if you say that. But you know what? We were all saying that a year ago about the Saints-Rams game on November 4th. Oh, no, it's only week 9. Well, what happened? The Saints and Rams, I believe, finished with the same record last year, didn't they? What was the tiebreaker? Head-to-head. So I think when you look at the future now, December 8th to me, I know they wear red, but it's kind of a red-letter day in New Orleans. And one of the things I talked about yesterday on TV, wouldn't it be crazy? All right, it would be a no-sleep week, probably a no-sleep month, okay? But if LSU somehow got to the national championship game in New Orleans, and then 6 days later, the Saints hosted the NFC championship game again, I don't think you could find a better football weekend. I mean, it would be a week. It would be pretty crazy. I think LSU has a great chance. And one other thing about the LSU-Alabama game, if the game is close, I think the loser of this game could still very well make the playoff. To me, let's just say that LSU lost by a touchdown in Tuscaloosa, and they won out. And how many wins they have against top 10 teams, Gordon? 3 top 10. Does anybody else have that kind of resume? No one has that resume. So you're going to have a hard time justifying to me somebody else from some other league ahead of 11-1 LSU who lost 1 game to Alabama by 7 points in Tuscaloosa. And to me, if LSU beats Alabama, they're going to be in the playoff regardless because they're going to win out, at least into the SEC championship, and Joe Burrow is going to win the Heisman Trophy. One other thing about what Coach McCluskey was talking about with the schedule. If you go look at the college football RPI today, there's only 3 leagues in the country that are ahead of the American this year. It's pretty amazing. The Pac-12 and the ACC now in conference RPI are below the American. And I hate to say this, but it's true. If Connecticut wasn't in the American, then the American RPI would be even higher. So there's a lot of good teams, and the West, without a doubt, you know, everyone's like, oh my God, Tulane's lost 2 games in a row. Yes, they have, but they've lost to 2 excellent teams, and the West is very difficult this year. And if you don't believe that's the case, ask TCU, who who lost to SMU. SMU has a very good team. And what happened to them? What happened to SMU? They got a transfer quarterback from Texas, who's a very good player. And their whole roster has been turned over, and they've been really good. One other thing I'd like to say, it's always a pleasure to be here with Ken Trahan and Ro Brown. Okay, when I was a 3rd grader at St. Mary Magdalene, I used to watch those guys on TV, and I said, one day, I want to be like both of them. All right, and years later, I get to be in the same room with these 2 giants of the industry. It is absolutely outstanding. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
I actually want to go back to the Saints.
Yes, sir.
Murray has been outstanding these
Yes.
last couple of games because I think it's because he's been the featured back.
Correct.
And he gets rolling when he gets a few carries and stuff. So when Kamara comes back, do you think it's going to be more of a 50-50 between
No,
those two?
I do not.
Or do you think they're going to go back to? Yeah.
I think if Kamara's healthy, he'll get at least 60 to 65% of the snaps because he's Alvin Kamara. So, look, now Latavius Murray is a very good player. And the one thing, if you remember in Minnesota, Latavius Murray has split time with other backs. So it's not a situation that he hasn't handled before. What I thought was very interesting is hearing him talk on Sunday in the locker room about getting his first receiving touchdown in the NFL in 7 years. And to put what the Saints do in perspective and how they use people, last year, I think he had 22 receptions with the Vikings. This year, he's got 23 already, and he's had 14 in the last 2 weeks. So who knew he was a pass receiver? But when you talk about one cut and the way he runs, all right, and behind the Saints offensive line, when they signed him, I thought he was a perfect match. Did I think he was as good as Mark Ingram? No. I was sorry to see Mark Ingram go. But again, a talent evaluation by the Saints. They lose Mark Ingram, they wanted to keep him. What do? They get this guy because they can convince him that, number one, you're going to be on a great offense, you're going to be playing with a Hall of Fame quarterback, and you have a chance to win a Super Bowl. That works. Yes, sir.
Yeah, could you see him if the right deal fell in our lap, making a trade here in the next couple hours for maybe a wide receiver?
I know there's been a lot of discussion about this guy and that guy. I would have to be very judicious with my draft picks because I think that that's the way they built their team. And when you look at their team right now, they haven't, and I don't want to say waste because that's not the proper term, okay? But they've been very judicious about holding on and doing the right things with their picks. If they had a deal, if it was a 5th round or below, something like that, I would consider it. But as you get higher, look at the players they got in the 2nd and 4th round this year. I mean, those guys have been really great players. And here's the thing about that. When you draft a rookie and he can really play, he's inexpensive for 4 or 5 years. And another guy I didn't mention either, who's on the last year of his contract, Von Bell, who's had a great year. You want to try to re-sign him. So I would be careful about that. Yes, sir.
First, it's fascinating hearing you talk. I didn't know you were that good. You really did your homework.
I try. I got so many,
Regardless of what they say.
You get somewhere we need to be.
Well, I'm going to give a negative question. I'm not a Gentry fan. I know the cliches. People are hurt. Williamson's out. What's going on? I don't think he could teach defense if it slapped him in the face.
When the other guy gets 130 a game, it's tough to win. And I was at the game last night, and believe me, there wasn't a lick of defense. Ro Brown could have been out there playing defense last night. He could have been guarding Steph Curry. All right. To me, not only that. Here's the thing that I find interesting, and Kenny and I were talking about this before the season. who's going to rebound? They played Jackson Hayes last night. He did a decent job. But against a team that doesn't rebound well and you get out-rebounded by 20, then you've got a problem. And look, I know Drew Holiday and Zion would make a difference, but Zion isn't going to grab 20 rebounds a game. He's a good rebounder, but he's not a great rebounder. So, you know, I'm going to tell this story because it's true, and I've kind of stayed away from it over the years, but this is a true story. Previous administration was interviewing a former head coach for the Pelicans job, and the previous administration looked at the former head coach and said, we want to be top 3 in the league in pace. Okay, the former head coach looked at the Pelicans and said, I want to be in the top 3 in winning. And to me, I want to be in top 3 in winning. And I don't know of any good basketball teams that I've seen over the years, any championship teams, who couldn't get stops at the end of games and couldn't grab rebounds. So the only way to me that they're going to win in the short term is to shoot the ball very well on an occasional night. And if you don't shoot the ball well, then you've got to have the fundamental things. Look, LSU is great offensively, but look what happened in the Auburn game. Stop after stop after stop after stop. I'm looking at all, I'm logging all the plays and everything, and I'm looking at all the stops after stop. You know what? It's 3rd and 5. They get it to a guy in space. Guess what? Somebody comes up, makes the tackle. In the NBA, it's the same thing. There's 30 seconds left in the game. The other players, best 2 players, you know they're going to shoot the ball, and you can get a stop. And you can get a rebound. And until they do that, then it is what it is. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Well, I think there was going to be, asking about Etuan Moore, I think there was going to be some people left out because they have so many options. At least that's, you know. Look, when they traded for those guys, they were going to play those guys. When they traded for those guys, they're going to play those guys. Ingram has earned his keep, but they're going to play Josh Hart, who's had a couple of good games, and they're going to, you know, I can't argue with them playing Frank Jackson. Can you? I think Frank Jackson's been a good player for them, a guy who's really been overlooked. What's that? Well, here's the thing about Redick hasn't played well. And here's the thing about Melly, okay? To me, Melly is a guy who works good when there's a 7-footer alongside of him who can swat and rebound. Because if you put him in the game as a big, he's not a great defender and he's not a rebounder. He's a spot-up 3-point shooter. He's a face-up 4, all right? And you put him in the game, then you better have somebody alongside of him who can make up for his deficiencies. And that's, look, we all have strengths and weaknesses. You know, Ken Trahan could never shoot the ball. Whenever we played in games, I always shot because I was the only one who could make anything. That's all he did was hack people, you know. He was a hack butcher. So he knows it's true. But anyhow, Melly is a guy, you know what you're getting. You're getting a designated shooter. But you've got to have a guy next to him that can rebound and play defense. Anybody else? Coach, congratulations on 250. Outstanding. And I want to say that every week we get to meet scholar athletes along the way in what we do on Friday nights. And Peyton Laredo was terrific. And he's a very nice young man. And he had a terrible injury right before the start of his senior season. And the one thing I can say about Peyton, not only is he a fine young man, but his attitude is out of sight good. And with people like that, I know the future's in good shape. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.